everyone. My name is Sara Harberson. I am America's college counselor. I'm here for a Facebook Live for all of you, all the parents, all the students, any counselors who want to ask questions. This is a rapid fire Q&A, and so you can ask your questions and I'm going to answer them as they come in. So we've got a lot of high school seniors who have heard back from probably all of their colleges at this point. A lot of students are trying to make a decision between now and May 1st, but there are a lot of waitlist offers that have gone out. So I've been getting a lot of questions about the waitlist lately, so feel free to ask your questions about that. There are going to be high school juniors who are starting this process in earnest. You might have questions about meeting with your school counselor or picking classes for next year or plans for summer. We also are going to have some 9th and 10th graders who are just getting their feet wet, learning about the college process. Right now in Application Nation, we're about to launch the starter college list, which is a really great list for 9th and 10th graders. We give them a list based on their transcript and their academic interests and their preferences. Ultimately, though, your college list is going to get narrowed down, usually at the end of the summer or the beginning of fall of senior year. But whatever stage of the process you are in, I'm happy to answer questions. I see we've already got some coming in, so I want to begin to answer them as they come in, and I'll try to answer as many as I can. All right, on the website of a highly selective college on my students list, 2 items surprised me and would love your thoughts. Number 1, please do not assume that your admissions chances are improved by applying under the early decision plan. Well, that's pretty unusual to state because any college that has early decision is usually going to have an elevated acceptance rate in early decision, especially compared to regular decision or sometimes early action and regular decision. Early decision acceptance rates oftentimes are 2, 3, or sometimes even 4 times as high as the college's early action and regular decision acceptance rate. So that would surprise me. I agree. I'd have to know the college's name, but that's highly unusual. As you asked, aren't the acceptance rates higher in early decision? They are, absolutely. And that's because it's a binding decision, right? So the student is saying, this is my first choice college. I've signed the early decision binding agreement. And in return, the reason that the student is doing that is to get an increased chance of admission and also finalizing their admissions process and where they're going to be going a lot sooner in senior year. And the second thing, it sounds like this college's website indicated, they do not have minimum test scores required for admission, and a score that may be below our average test ranges should not deter a student from applying. Is this really the case? This is a great case study right here. All right. Most colleges don't have minimum test scores, actually. There might be some state or public universities that have a minimum testing requirement, but most don't. But the fact of the matter is that every college has a certain range that they feel comfortable with admitting a student. And if the student falls out of that middle 50% range, it doesn't mean that they can't get admitted to that college, because obviously it's a middle 50% range. It means 25% of the students that are admitted are going to have higher than that middle 50% range, and 25% of students admitted will have lower than that range. But if you're in that middle 50% range, you are objectively competitive. And it doesn't mean you can't get admitted with lower scores. It just means it's usually a lot harder to get admitted. And the students who are going to get admitted with lower scores tend to be students who check off some boxes in terms of institutional priorities for the college. And institutional priorities can be recruited athletes, they can be students coming from certain backgrounds and certain underrepresented states, for example. There are certain states that a college may not get as many applications from, and so a student who's coming from an underrepresented state might have a lower test score, but because they're coming from that state that the college really wants to enroll more students from, that student could be admitted. but usually no minimum scores, but we need to be realistic. If you are coming from, a regular background, and your parents are college educated, and you're coming from a more represented state in an applicant pool like the state of New Jersey or California or Florida, those kinds of states, you have to almost expect that your scores are at least in that middle 50% range, unless you are offering something additional that the college is interested in. But great question. If the school ACT score is better than the first, if the second ACT score is better than the first, should a student submit both to demonstrate improvement, or only submit the higher score? I would only submit the higher score. Almost all colleges allow you to do that. There are going to be a few exceptions. Georgetown is the most well-known exception, at least up until this point. For decades now, like going on over 50 years, they like to see all test scores, but that's pretty unusual. But if you have a better second ACT than the first, just send the higher scores. We lost our home in Pacific Palisades, and my daughter's high school went online. Oh, my heart goes out to you and your family and your community. So she went to another school for the spring semester. She was taking regular calculus in the fall, and now has been taking AP Calculus, AB, at this new school in the spring. Would selective schools expect her to take the AP exam after only one semester that started on February 1st? I don't think so. That's the thing. I think it's very understandable for your daughter not to take the AP exam. I mean, taking these AP exams after you've taken the class, the subject matter for an entire year, is really difficult. But to jump into that AP course second semester, actually late second semester, she does not have to take the AP exam. AP exams are not required for admission at 99.9% of the colleges. This mom goes on to say she's going to prepare and do her best, of course, but if she doesn't have a 4 or 5 to submit, can she take the AP Calculus AB exam next year? You don't need to take it next year. I assume, it sounds like she's a junior, I could be wrong, but by the time she would take it again, it would be senior year and the admissions process would be done, and that AP score wouldn't really matter a whole lot unless you're trying to get AP credit, and more colleges aren't very generous with AP credit. If she's a younger student, like a sophomore, trying to take an AP exam a year after you take the class, it's extremely difficult because that's in the past. You're already focused on your current classes, so I wouldn't recommend that. All right, next question. Do you have acceptance rates of percentages of accepted class for Princeton or Yale, single choice early action? Penn says 50% of their acceptances are from early action. Are other Ivies similar to this? Okay, a couple of things. Not all colleges are going to be transparent about admissions data. Some colleges, even a few in the Ivy League, do not release any admissions data. It's really unhelpful because students need to get a sense of how competitive the college is, in my opinion. But that being said, if a college provides acceptance rates, almost always they are only going to give you the overall acceptance rate between the early round and the regular round, whether it's early decision or early action or single choice early action, whatever it is. It's an overall acceptance rate between the early round and the regular round. There are very few colleges that are going to provide you a breakdown of the acceptance rates between the early and regular round. Interestingly, Georgetown has been one school that is very clear about their acceptance rates between early action and regular, and it tends to be exactly the same. So if I'm not mistaken, it was about 13% last year, whether you applied early action or regular. So I appreciate the transparency there with Georgetown, but very few colleges are going to do that. In terms of the Ivies, Penn has an early decision program, not an early action program. Early decision, again, is that binding decision. The student applies to their first choice school, and in return, they're going to have a better chance of getting admitted if they apply early decision. I don't know what their acceptance rate was this past early round. I can tell you, though, a college that has early decision, especially a more selective college, they are usually filling about 50% of their class through early decision. Now, early action's different. Whether it's early action, whether it's single choice early action or non-restrictive early action, you're not getting a huge admissions boost in the admissions process by applying through an early action program. It might be a slightly higher acceptance rate for early action or restrictive early action or single choice early action, but it's not going to be significant. And you also have to remember, a lot of times with the highly selective colleges like the Ivies that have early action, a lot of recruited athletes and a lot of the legacies are going to be applying in that early action round. So it tends to skew the acceptance rates in that early round. Please suggest some ideas to improve the activities list during the summer for a rising senior. Great question. All right. So what I would recommend that you do if you are a high school junior, you don't need a resume right now. You don't need to fill out an application. It's way too early. But what I would recommend is writing down all the activities that you've done in high school. A lot of times you think you don't have that many, and then you start writing them down and you realize, wow, I have more than I thought. When you're using the Common Application, there's only room for 10 activities, so keep that in mind, only 10. For some students, that's plenty of room. For some students, that's not enough. But writing your activities down right about now is helpful because you can start to see, well, what am I missing? So here are some things that I want a high school senior to have on their activities list. I want at least one activity related to community service, and ideally it's something that the student has done consistently or with a chunk of time, designated time. If they're able to get a job, that's wonderful. So if you look at your list and you don't have a paying job, maybe this summer you can do that. If you haven't done any community service, you could do that over the summer. But one of the best ways to use your summer before senior year is to think about your major choice, whatever it is. And one of the best ways to strengthen your application and increase your chances of admission at the colleges on your list is to have evidence to support that major. So for example, let's say you're interested in being a psychology major. Well, maybe you can do independent research this summer in psychology. Maybe you could be a research assistant for a psychology professor in your community. There are a lot of ways to show evidence for your major choice, and you can do this with every major choice there is. Think about doing something this summer that directly aligns with that major choice. So that's a good use of the summer. Hi, Althea. For students with a 36 ACT but challenging courses and a slightly lower GPA, what would you recommend in terms of focusing on in the admissions process? Really great question. So sometimes we have students who have really strong grades, perfect grades, and they've taken all advanced courses, but their test scores may not be as strong as their transcript, and sometimes it's the reverse. So you have to remember, for a student who is a very strong test taker, who gets a 36 on the ACT, which is the highest score you can get on the ACT, you have to remember that all the colleges, whether they are testing required or test optional, care so much about test scores. They don't want to see their average test scores go down. So having high test scores in this environment in 2025 can be a good thing. If the grades or the curriculum or both are not as strong as that 36 ACT score, that student may not be competitive for the most selective colleges in the country, but I can tell you that for very selective colleges, they're still going to be very competitive. So based on the information you gave me, I think applying to a college with a single-digit acceptance rate might be very difficult, but once you get into that 20, 25%, 30% range, you're probably going to see great results if everything else in the application is strong. And that is because that test score is something that every college ultimately wants, except for the colleges that don't consider test scores at all. How can my child stand out in the admissions process when their school is hyper competitive with several impressive students? My child is extremely smart, albeit quiet and introverted. Okay, God, this is such a great question. I feel like I could spend an entire week answering this question. Couple things for how a student can stand out. They can have a soundbite. So Soundbite is the title of my book. I would definitely get a copy of it and read it. And it shows students and families that you don't have to have the highest test score. You don't have to have the highest grades in your class. You don't have to be taking the most AP classes. You actually don't have to be a major leader at your high school to stand out in an applicant pool. What you do need to do is you have to recognize what separates you from the next student. You have to be able to identify what makes you special, and you have to keep that so close to you and make sure that it is celebrated in the application. Other ways to stand out in an applicant pool is not to apply to the same colleges that all the super competitive students are applying to, because you will be compared initially against your peers, your classmates from the same high school applying to that college. Another way to stand out is to apply to a major that you love instead of a major that you think is going to bring you financial success down the road. There are a lot of students right now focused on pre-professional programs. Those programs are very competitive to get into. Those would be, undergraduate business programs, engineering programs, computer science, sometimes nursing, and some other health-related fields. But not everybody wants to major in that. And by the way, you don't have to major in those specific areas to necessarily go into those fields after college. So keep that in mind. So I like students to follow their hearts, especially for their undergraduate major. A lot of people get caught up with, are you going to be able to get a job? Are you going to be able to pay your bills? Well, you know what? I was a liberal arts major. I was able to pay my bills, even though I started off with a very low salary when I was 22 years old. But you know what? If you love something and you go all in, it doesn't matter whether you're in business or whether you're in the field of art, you can be highly successful. So I like students and families to think about their undergraduate major, because some of these undergraduate majors are more unique and underrepresented in an applicant pool and underrepresented on a college campus. And if you love that area, that field, it can really pay off in the admissions process and allow you to study something you love. My son is scheduling courses for his senior. Oh, one last thing. I would just say, especially young women, and I would say even middle-aged women, like someone I know, we oftentimes focus on our weaknesses and our limitations. We're so honest. And when we're in an interview situation or when we're talking about ourselves, we often talk about our weaknesses and limitations, or sometimes we even lead with that. And I would just be careful when I'm talking to young women. Only talk about your strengths when you are conversing and talking about yourself to other people, because that's what they will focus on. Little tip. Okay, next up. My son is scheduling courses for his senior year and plans to major in finance, possibly adding on data analytics. For his last course for senior year, he's deciding between accounting or AP computer science. He prefers computer science as one of the other preferred from an admissions perspective. I'm not going to go through all of those classes. I'd have to take some time and get my readers on for that. What I can tell you is a couple things. Finance, business, all of those businessy majors, super competitive. So you've got to have really strong evidence in your application for it. The most important class for any type of business major is going to be calculus. And the more advanced calculus, the better. So AP Calculus AB or AP Calculus BC by senior year, the more advanced calculus, the more competitive you can be. Accounting, entrepreneurship, finance, or any business related class like that is going to be considered an elective class. It's not going to move the needle. It's not going to make a difference in the admissions process. So you can take those classes because I think it can confirm with the student, oh yes, this is what I want to major in. And it can show a little bit of evidence, but in the end, it's an elective class. It's those core academic classes that are much more important. AP Computer Science it's not like a traditional math or science class. I always call it kind of an add-on class. I think it's a great add-on class for a student that has room in their schedule, but it's not necessary. It would be important to take an AP Computer Science if you want to be a computer science applicant or major or something related to it. So if your son is interested in data analytics, I think if you have a choice between accounting and AP Computer Science, after taking your 5 core classes, English, math, science, history, and a world or ancient language, if you have a choice, I'd take AP Computer Science, but it's not necessary. For Vanderbilt's waitlist, hi Jennifer, they have an information session planned for mid-April. Should my son wait until then to send in his letter of continued interest? It's interesting, Jennifer, when I was preparing for tonight's Zoom call for AN 2025, I was looking at the common data set for Vanderbilt, and I'm trying to remember what I saw. I didn't use it as an example tonight, so my guess is it wasn't really helpful. Sometimes colleges don't provide waitlist information. It's interesting that they're providing an information session. I think that could be helpful. I personally wouldn't wait for the letter of continued interest. I'd probably send in that letter of continued interest before that. But mid-April is about the right time. So if that information session is happening in mid-April, you could wait to see what they say. I don't, if they're offering an information session in mid-April, I doubt that they're going to start using the wait list before that. That would be really wrong, wouldn't it? Right? They wouldn't do that. So now that they think through it, maybe wait to see that what they say in the information session. I don't think it's going to change the student's letter of continued interest, but you might get some tips here or there. Okay. My son is looking at the University of, I'm assuming, Notre Dame. As his reach school. He's a junior with a 4.0, unweighted 5.2, weighted GPA. He's got AP and ACE classes. He needs to work on his ACT and or SAT. He got pneumonia in the fall of his junior year and had to go part-time for school. Wow, oh my gosh, I hope he's doing well. I had pneumonia in college, and I just remember not having the strength for a very long time, even to walk around campus to get to classes. So I hope he's doing better. I'd have to see, his transcript. I can't tell just by looking at an unweighted GPA or a weighted GPA. I like to look at every single class taken from 9th grade on to be able to really evaluate things. But if this student is the highest achieving type of student, objectively speaking, in terms of taking the most challenging curriculum at their high school for all 4 years, getting the highest grades that they can, and their test scores are really strong for a highly selective college like Notre Dame, then having it as a reach school on their college list makes a lot of sense. I would say that Notre Dame is a highly selective college, and just as I mentioned earlier, they want to see high test scores, especially a student coming from a majority background, a college-educated background, or a state that is more represented than others. I can tell what state you're coming from by a couple of details in your question, and that would be an overrepresented state. So testing's still going to be important. It doesn't mean that a student can't get into a school like Notre Dame without scores. Just the bar is going to be really, really high, but it can happen. And I saw that happen this year with one of our AN students. Hi, Jessica. I'm seeing a lot of familiar names, which is cool. What's the best way to approach teachers for letters of recommendation? Another great question. I like students to approach their teachers for requesting a letter of recommendation in the spring of junior year. I would say April and May is a good time to do it unless your high school does it sooner. There are going to be some high schools that don't have a policy in place, and it's important to for the student to prioritize this and make it happen before the end of junior year. You really should be asking junior year core teachers. Sometimes a sophomore year core teacher can work. Sometimes a teacher that you're having senior year that you've already had in a previous year can also work, but we're focused on core academic teachers, English, math, science, history, and language teachers. My opinion about letters of recommendation, it's a little complex. It's my belief that the student should not be approaching the teacher for the first time to talk to them, to ask them for a letter of recommendation, right? We want our kids to be building up a rapport with their teachers, especially the teachers that, they can tell really believe in them. So I encourage students to talk to teachers in their office hours well before spring of junior year. They can ask about what courses they should take next year, ideas for summer. Maybe they loved a unit that they were studying in that teacher's class. It is important for students to get comfortable talking to adults, and especially adults that can help them out. I also believe that it's better to give a teacher a heads up before you ask them for a letter of recommendation. And so I have always recommended my students to send an email to the teacher in advance, unless there's a policy against that in your high school. But giving the teacher a heads up can be helpful. They don't like to be caught off guard. They don't like to be caught off guard, at the end of class, because they usually have another class to go to. Sometimes they've already said yes to too many students by the time you ask them. Sometimes they don't feel comfortable writing letters of recommendation. So sending an email kind of gauges their response to you and gives the teacher a little bit of a heads up. And so you can put together an email that says, I'm thinking about asking teachers for recommendation, and you are my favorite teacher, and I've learned so much, and you can give it reasons why. And you can say, can I set up a time to meet with you? And that's a really great way to say, I'm not gonna just do the ask over email. I'm giving you a heads up over email, but I really wanna sit down and talk to you and talk through it and tell you why I wanna ask you in person. So that's the way I would do it. All right, is cognitive science a popular major? Is there a way to make it distinctive? Cognitive science is not going to be offered at every college or university, but those that have it tend to be more of the research universities. I would say that it's not a super popular major to list on an application, but it tends to attract a pretty high achieving group of students. What is a way to distinguish yourself in that pool? You want to be taking the most rigorous curriculum in all 5 core subjects, especially in math and science. So most students who are going to be competitive for cognitive science are going to be in AP Calculus AB or AP Calculus BC by senior year, and they're probably going to be taking at least one AP Science class by senior year, like AP Chemistry or AP Biology or AP Physics. And that is important to note because you want all 3 of those sciences represented in high school plus 1 more. So 4 years of science, 4 years of math, obviously. 4 years of all of the 5 core subjects is important. And obviously having some evidence would be great. It's hard with cognitive science though. It's not a common undergraduate major. As I mentioned, it's more of a graduate program. So getting those research opportunities can be difficult, but sometimes if you're willing to work for free for a professor in their lab, their cognitive science lab, that can be great evidence to put on your application. Is it possible to take a gap year and have a college offer the same merit and package for you the year you begin to attend? Okay, let me see if I understand that completely. I'm gonna play this out a little bit. So a gap year, for anyone who doesn't know, is going to be a student who graduates from high school and instead of going right on to college takes a gap year. And you can do a lot of things in a gap year. You can travel, you can work, you can volunteer. And so I think the question is asking, let's say you get admitted to college A as a high school senior and they give you a merit scholarship. If you apply again to that college during a gap year, I think that's what you're asking, will you get the same amount of merit? No, not necessarily. I hope I was able to answer that question accurately, but every year is going to be different. And your gap year admissions results tend to, at least the admissions decision, not merit money, but the decision, whether you get admitted or not, it often isn't going to change during the gap year because it's very difficult to do something that would change the admissions decision in a short amount of time. So I recommend a gap year, not for the students who want to reapply to college. I recommend a gap year for students who know where they want to go, but want to do something in that year between high school and college before they start. Hello, however, how do you signal to a higher acceptance college that you would attend if enough merit was granted? Concerned about future rejections, as I hear the colleges want to protect their yield. Yeah, you're right. There is this whole, colleges don't want students strategizing, but they strategize all the time. And one way that they do that is they do yield protection, some colleges. Yield protection is when a college does not admit a student who should get in, objectively, subjectively, whatever their process is. And they don't admit the student because they think that student is not going to enroll if they admit them, and they don't want to waste an acceptance on a student who's not going to enroll. That's called yield protection. One way to avoid that is to make sure for that kind of a college that you are showing demonstrated interest before you apply, and in your application especially. So demonstrated interest, if a college tracks demonstrated interest and factors it into the admissions process, they're going to be paying attention and looking to see if you did an official visit through the admissions office. They're going to look to see if you took advantage of an interview, if it's offered, if they did a local reception in your community, did you attend it? But demonstrated interest can also factor into your application. If they have a supplemental essay and it's optional and you decide not to do it, that's going to raise some concerns. If you do write the supplemental essays, but you don't put a lot of effort into it compared to the rest of your application, that is also going to raise concerns. So for those colleges that are strategizing and protecting their yield because they're worried the student, a high achieving student, isn't going to enroll if they admit the student, make sure you show demonstrated interest before you apply. Make sure you do everything you can in that application to show that you are invested. All right. My introverted straight A student with a rigorous course load is concerned about having limited extracurricular and no leadership. What advice do you have for him? Thank you. Okay, well, I can tell you I can relate on a lot of levels. I do this for a living now, but I was a really shy, quiet, reserved kid like your student in high school. And I think there's this sense that you have to have a ton of extracurriculars and you have to be a big leader to get into a great college or a highly selective college, and that's simply not the case. But it does go back to something I said earlier. We often lead with our weaknesses or our limitations or what other people think are limitations, but they're kind of like our magic, our secret sauce that make us who we are. So I would just encourage your student to focus on the activities that are really meaningful to them. Yes, the Common App has room for 10 activities, but I've seen some incredible, extraordinary students get into highly selective colleges with far less than that. I can think of one student in particular who's going to be graduating from Stanford this year that I know of that did not have 10 activities. It just goes to show you it's about quality over quantity. So I would say the number of extracurriculars doesn't matter. It also doesn't matter about leadership. I think a lot of people think you have to have the biggest leadership titles in your extracurriculars to stand out. That's not the case. But what you do have to do is know how to celebrate your impact and what you do with each activity in the most unique and clever way on the activities list. So for any of those veteran Application Nation families, you know I do an entire Zoom call in August, right before senior year begins, on filling out the activities list. Most students are very straightforward. They think they have to present in a very generic, sterile way. But the fact is, a lot of students are presenting themselves in those activities in the same exact way. So I really encourage students to be really unique and have an individual approach to how they present their activities. And that makes such an impact. It makes a bigger impact than those leadership titles do. All right, I'm noticing that many selective schools highlight the growing percentage of first-generation college students. USC, I assume that's University of Southern California, shows 22% are first-generation college students. Berkeley is 30%. Do you believe this is a growing trend? I worry that these types of admissions decisions limit the number of available seats to kids like mine, okay? And kids like mine too. I mean, I went to college, I have a graduate degree, and so does my husband. And yeah, the truth is, when you're looking at the more selective colleges, they are going to be shifting the paradigm of admission based on the student's background. Now, race and culture and ethnicity, that's going to be really tricky right now, so we're not going to talk about that. But the level of the parent's education is still absolutely considered by the more selective colleges, and they're going to expect more from a student whose parents are college educated or have advanced degrees, professional degrees, or graduate degrees beyond that. And a student whose parents have not graduated college is going to be evaluated in a very different context. And so, yes, there are going to be a lot of highly selective colleges or more selective colleges that are focused on getting their percentage of first-generation college students up, but it's still usually pretty low, and that's why colleges want to work on it. I would say that, you know, the number of first-generation college students in an applicant pool, the percentage is not very high, even though colleges want it to be high. So as much as we feel like those students might take a spot from our kids whose parents are college educated or beyond, you know, there really should be room for everyone. And I think when there is transparency, and I applaud the colleges that provide data like that, like the percentage of students whose parents did not go to college, I really applaud those colleges, but they're usually not providing all of the transparency that we want. They're not telling you about students who get admitted for very different reasons, and sometimes for reasons that have nothing to do with the student's qualifications. So there is or should be room for every student, whatever their background is. But we do want to keep in mind that if the student is coming from a background where their parents haven't graduated college, it doesn't mean they can just walk in and get admitted. It just means that their application is going to be evaluated a little bit differently. Their essays may not be as polished. They might not go to a high school that has a large percentage of college-bound students. They might be at a high school without a school counselor, so their application is evaluated or contextualized in that setting. Okay. Should a sophomore start a dual enrollment class this summer, and which one? Great question. This is going to be my last one. I still have to talk to my college freshman daughter and eat some dinner and make sure the other two kids are in bed. But this is a great question. Dual enrollment classes you want to be careful about. If you are applying to colleges outside of your home state, or if you're applying to the more selective colleges, and you have a choice between AP and dual enrollment classes, admissions officers almost always prefer those AP classes, unless it's a dual enrollment class that goes above and beyond those AP classes, like you're taking, I don't know, like linear algebra or multivariable calculus as a dual enrollment class after taking AP Calculus BC. So be aware that dual enrollment and AP are not viewed the same way, especially by those out-of-state colleges who are not going to be giving you credit for those dual enrollment classes, and for those highly selected colleges that are always going to prefer AP or International Baccalaureate classes over dual enrollment classes. And then summer, you should not be taking a summer class unless you absolutely have to. And I would say if you failed a class during the school year, yes, you should take a summer class. You should repeat that class and get an A in it. But almost always, you should not be taking a summer class. A lot of students take summer classes because they think it's going to impress admissions officers, but that is the last thing admissions officers want to say that you do in the summer. They really want students to take a break from taking classes and do something else that they can't do during the school year. So taking a summer class, whether it's AP or dual enrollment or just at the local high school, that's not something that most of us in this industry are going to recommend. We want students to do things in the summer that high school students should do. They can get a job, they can do research, they can help their family out, they can watch their younger siblings, they can, work for a professor. There's so many things you can do besides take classes. So try to think about doing something else. And remember, when you're listing your activities in the activity section on your application, summer courses is not an extracurricular activity. That's part of your education. So remember that. Make sure you're doing something this summer, every summer, that could potentially be reportable, could be listed on your extracurricular activities list. And on that note, I think we got to wrap it up. But we had a great crowd here tonight. I hope you're all doing well. And I try to do Facebook Lives a couple times a year. But if you need more support in the admissions process, check out my weekly blog. I also have a ton of free resources on my website, saraharberson.com. But obviously, if you need more support, I offer Application Nation for families who are going through the admissions process with their student. Good luck to all those high school seniors making their final decisions. Good luck to the freshmen, sophomores, and juniors who are just getting started. Have a great night, everyone. Take care. Bye.